Some people walk through life believing they already know who they are. They wake up every morning, follow the same roads, talk to the same people, and never once stop to ask themselves if this is really their story or just a story someone else wrote for them. But every now and then, life sends a moment so strange, so unexpected that it cracks everything wide open. And in that crack, something real begins to grow. This is one of those stories. It is about a woman who thought she had nothing left. It is about a man who carried the silence of mountains inside him. And it is about the one moment that changed everything. When she trembled and said words she had never spoken before. And he looked at her and said something she had never been told. If you have ever felt lost, if you have ever stood at the edge of your own life wondering if you should jump or turn back, then this story will find you exactly where you are. The autumn air in the small town of Ridgewater, North Carolina, carried the smell of wet earth and burning oak. The leaves had turned deep shades of red and gold, and the mountains in the distance looked like they were painted by a hand that knew sadness well. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where secrets were hard to keep and even harder to forget. And it was in this town, on a cold Tuesday morning in October, that Clara Jennings sat in her small kitchen and stared at a letter she had been holding for nearly an hour. Her hands were shaking, not because of the cold, not because she was sick, but because the words on that paper had just torn apart the last piece of the life she thought she knew. The letter was from a lawyer in Asheville. It said that her late mother, Ruth Jennings, had left behind a piece of land, but this land was not in Ridgewater. It was not anywhere Clara had ever been. It was deep in the Cherokee homeland, in a place called Stillwater Hollow, tucked between two ridges where no paved road had ever been built. Clara read the letter again and again. Her mother had never once spoken of this place. Ruth Jennings had been a quiet woman. She worked at the textile mill for 31 years, raised Clara alone after her father left when Clara was only 4, and never once complained about the hand life dealt her. She went to church on Sundays, made cornbread on Fridays, and kept a small garden behind the house that she talked to like it was a living friend. But she never talked about land. She never talked about the Cherokee. And she certainly never talked about Stillwater Hollow. Clara folded the letter and put it in the pocket of her coat. She walked to the window and looked out at the street. The town was waking up slowly. A dog was barking somewhere down the road. Old Mr. Patterson was sweeping his porch like he did every single morning since his wife passed. The world outside was doing what it always did. But inside Clara, something had shifted. Something she could not name. She was 34 years old. She had no husband, no children. She worked part-time at the library and part-time at the diner on 5th Street. She had a few friends, but no one she would call close. She had lived her whole life in Ridgewater, and for the most part she had accepted that this was all there was. But the letter had opened a door she did not know existed, and now she could not close it. That same afternoon, Clara drove to Asheville. The lawyer's office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the river. His name was Mr. Dalton. He was a thin man with kind eyes and a slow way of talking that made everything he said feel important. He explained that Ruth Jennings had inherited the land from a woman named Alma Birdsong, who had passed away nearly 40 years ago. Alma had been a Cherokee elder, a woman of great respect in her community. And according to the records, Alma Birdsong had been Ruth Jennings' mother. Clara felt the floor move under her feet. She gripped the armrest of the chair and stared at Mr. Dalton like he had spoken in a language she did not understand. Her grandmother was Cherokee. Her mother had Cherokee blood, and no one had ever told her. Mr. Dalton handed her a second envelope. Inside was a photograph. It was old, faded at the edges, and slightly bent. It showed a woman standing in front of a small wooden cabin. She was tall, with long dark hair, and a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone and softened by rain. Her eyes were deep and full of something Clara could not explain. Behind her, the mountains rose like sleeping giants, and at the bottom of the photograph, written in pencil, were the words, Alma Birdsong, Stillwater Hollow, 1961. Clara held the photograph close to her chest. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just sat there, breathing, trying to understand how a whole part of her life had been hidden from her for 34 years. Mr. Dalton explained that the land was still there. It was roughly 40 acres, mostly forest, with a creek running through it and the remains of the old cabin still standing. No one had lived there in decades. But the land was legally hers now, and she could do whatever she wanted with it. She drove back to Ridgewater in silence. She did not turn on the radio. She did not stop for food. She just drove, with a photograph on the passenger seat beside her, and the mountains watching her through the windshield like they had been waiting for her all along. For 2 weeks, Clara did nothing. She went to work. She came home. She cooked dinner. She sat in her mother's old chair and looked at the photograph. She read the letter again and again. She tried to remember if her mother had ever said anything, even a small thing, that might have hinted at the truth. But there was nothing. Ruth Jennings had buried this secret so deep that even the earth did not remember it. Then one night, Clara had a dream. She was standing in a forest. The trees were tall and thick and the air smelled like cedar and wild mint. A creek was running somewhere nearby, and the sound of it was like a song she had heard before but could not place. And in the dream, a woman was standing at the edge of the trees looking at her. The woman had long dark hair and deep eyes. She did not speak. She just held out her hand. Clara woke up with her heart pounding. She sat up in bed and looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. The house was quiet, but Clara was not quiet inside. Something was pulling her. Something she could not resist. The next morning, she packed a bag. She told her boss at the diner she needed a few days off. She told the library she had a family matter to take care of. She loaded her old truck with a sleeping bag, a cooler of food, and a flashlight. She put the photograph and the letter in her jacket pocket, and she drove south, toward the mountains, toward Stillwater Hollow, toward a part of herself she had never known existed. The drive took almost 4 hours. The roads got narrower as she went deeper into the mountains. The trees got thicker. The sky got smaller. Eventually, the paved road ended, and she found herself on a dirt path that wound through the forest like a snake trying to hide. Her truck bounced and rattled, and more than once she thought about turning back, but she did not. She reached the edge of Stillwater Hollow just before noon. The sun was high, but the light was soft, filtered through the canopy of ancient oaks and pines. She stepped out of the truck and stood there, listening. The silence was enormous. Not empty silence, but full silence, like the land was breathing. She could hear the creek. She could hear birds. She could hear the wind moving through the branches like a whisper passed from tree to tree. She followed a narrow path through the trees, and after about 10 minutes of walking, she saw it. The cabin. It was smaller than she had imagined. The wood was old and grey, and the roof had caved in on one side. The porch was covered in leaves and moss, but the walls were still standing, and the door was still on its hinges, and above the door, carved into the wood, were 2 words, birdsong. Home. Clara stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under her weight. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was one room. There was a stone fireplace against the far wall, a wooden table in the center, and a bed frame in the corner with no mattress. The floor was covered in dust and dried leaves, but on the wall, above the fireplace, there was something that stopped Clara in her tracks. It was a painting. A large painting on stretched deerskin. It showed a river winding through a valley, with mountains on both sides and a single eagle flying above. The colors were faded, but still beautiful. Deep blues, warm reds, soft greens, and at the bottom of the painting, in the same handwriting as the photograph, were the words, "For the one who comes home." Clara felt her knees give out. She sat down on the dusty floor and pressed her hands against her face, and for the first time in as long as she could remember, she cried. She cried for her mother, who had kept this secret for so long. She cried for her grandmother, who had lived in this cabin and painted this painting and waited for someone who never came. And she cried for herself, for the 34 years she had spent not knowing who she really was. She stayed in the hollow for the rest of the day. She walked the land. She followed the creek. She found the remains of a garden behind the cabin, where wild herbs and flowers still grew, despite decades of neglect. She found a circle of stones near the creek that looked like it had once been used for ceremonies. She found old tools, clay pots, and a basket woven so tightly it still held its shape after all these years. As the sun began to set, Clara built a small fire outside the cabin. She sat beside it and ate some bread and cheese from her cooler. The sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. The stars came out, more than she had ever seen in her life. And the silence of the hollow wrapped around her like a blanket. She was about to go to her truck to sleep when she heard something. A sound in the trees, not an animal, something bigger. Something walking with purpose. She stood up quickly, her heart racing. She grabbed her flashlight and pointed it toward the tree line. A man stepped out of the shadows. He was tall. He had long black hair tied back with a leather cord. His skin was the color of clay after rain, and his eyes were dark and steady. He wore a simple jacket, worn jeans, and boots that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. He carried nothing in his hands. He just stood there, looking at her. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back. Her hand was shaking so badly that the flashlight beam danced across the trees like a scared firefly. The man did not move. He just looked at her with those steady eyes. And then he spoke. His voice was low and calm, like water moving over smooth stones. "You are standing on birdsong land," he said. Clara swallowed hard. "I know," she said. "It belongs to me now." The man studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, like he was seeing something he had been expecting. "You are Ama's blood," he said. It was not a question. Clara nodded. She could feel tears building behind her eyes again, but she held them back. "My mother was her daughter," she said. "Ruth Jennings." The man was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled between them. The creek sang its quiet song in the darkness. Finally, the man nodded slowly. "My name is Jesse Coldwater," he said. "I am a keeper of the old ways. Ama, birdsong, was my teacher. She taught me the medicines, the songs, the stories. She told me that one day someone would come back to this land. She told me to watch for them." Clara felt something break open inside her chest. Not pain, exactly. Something deeper. Something older. Like a seed that had been buried underground for decades and was finally feeling the sun. "I do not know anything," Clara said, and her voice cracked. "I do not know anything about this place. About the Cherokee. About my grandmother. My mother never told me. I did not even know until 2 weeks ago." Jesse Coldwater looked at her. His face was like the mountains. Still patient, unchanging. "That is why you are here," he said. "The land called you. Ama's spirit called you. The old ways do not forget, even when the people do." He took a step forward and sat down on the other side of the fire. He looked at the flames for a while and then he looked back at Clara. "You are afraid," he said. Clara did not deny it. "I am terrified," she whispered. "I do not know what I am doing here. I do not know what any of this means. I have spent my whole life in a small town, doing small things, and now I find out my whole life was built on a lie." Jesse shook his head slowly. "Not a lie," he said. A silence. "There is a difference. Your mother did not lie to you. She protected you from pain she did not know how to carry. Many of our people did this. Many of our grandmothers and grandfathers hid who they were because the world punished them for it. They cut their hair. They changed their names. They buried the old language. They did it to survive. Your mother did what she thought was right." Clara looked at the fire. The flames danced and popped. Sparks flew up into the darkness and disappeared among the stars. She thought about her mother sitting alone in that small house in Ridgewater, carrying this secret for her entire life. She thought about Ama Birdsong standing in front of this cabin, painting rivers and eagles on deerskin, waiting for a daughter who would never come back. "What do I do now?" Clara asked. Jesse looked at her across the fire. The light played on his face, and for a moment he looked like he was made of the same ancient stone as the mountains around them. "Now," he said, "you begin." She lay in the back of her truck, wrapped in her sleeping bag, staring up at the sky through the window. The stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Every sound in the forest was amplified. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the constant whisper of the creek. She felt like she was lying at the bottom of something vast and deep, and she did not know if she was sinking or floating. In the morning, she woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up and looked out the window. Jesse Coldwater was sitting by the fire, which he had rebuilt and fed with fresh wood. A small pot hung over the flames, and the smell coming from it was unlike anything Clara had ever known. Earthy, sweet. She climbed out of the truck and walked toward the fire. Jesse looked up at her and nodded. "Sit," he said. "Drink." It was warm. The taste was strange, but not unpleasant, like pine needles and honey, and something wild she could not name. "What is this?" she asked. Medicine tea, Jessie said. Alma taught me to make it. She drank it every morning. She said it helped her remember who she was. The warmth spread through her chest, and she felt something loosen inside her. Some knot she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten it was there. Jessie sat across from her and looked at the mountains. The morning light was soft and golden, and the mist hung low in the hollow like a veil between the world of the living and the world of everything else. I will come back tomorrow, he said. If you are still here, I will begin to teach you, but only if you want to learn. The old ways cannot be forced, they must be chosen. Clara looked at him. She looked at the cabin. She looked at the mountains. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. It was not happiness exactly. It was not peace. It was something more like purpose. Like the ground under her feet had finally become solid. I will be here, she said. Jessie Coldwater stood up. He looked at her one more time, and for just a second, something close to a smile crossed his face. Then he turned and walked into the trees, and the forest swallowed him like he had never been there at all. Clara sat by the fire and drank the rest of the tea. The creek sang. The birds called. The wind moved through the branches, and somewhere deep inside her, in a place she was only just beginning to discover, a voice whispered, "Welcome home." The days that followed changed Clara Jennings in ways she could never have predicted. Each morning she woke in the hollow before the sun came up, and each morning the world around her felt a little less foreign and a little more like something she had always known but had simply forgotten. The mist would rise from the creek like slow breath, and the trees would stand like old guardians, watching, waiting, as if they had been expecting her for a very long time. She stopped checking her phone. She stopped thinking about the diner, the library, the small rooms of her small life back in Ridgewater. Something was happening to her out here, and she did not want to interrupt it. Jessie Coldwater came back the next morning just as he had promised. He walked out of the trees at dawn, carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder and a walking stick in his hand. He did not say good morning. He did not ask how she had slept. He simply looked at her, nodded, and said, "We walk." They walked for hours that first day. Jessie moved through the forest like he was part of it, stepping over roots and stones without looking down, ducking under branches without slowing his pace. Clara struggled to keep up. Her boots slipped on the wet leaves. Her legs burned going up the steep ridges. Her breathing was loud and rough, and more than once she had to stop and lean against a tree to catch her breath. But Jessie never stopped. He never turned around. He just kept walking, and Clara kept following. They reached a ridge overlooking the entire hollow. From up there, the land spread out below them like a painting. The creek wound through the valley like a silver thread. The trees stretched in every direction, a sea of green and gold and red. And in the distance, the mountains rose one after another, layer upon layer, fading into the blue haze of the horizon. Jessie sat on a flat rock at the edge of the ridge. Clara sat beside him, her chest heaving, her face red from the climb. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, looking at the land. "This is what Alma saw every day," Jessie finally said. "She would come up here in the morning and sit on this rock and watch the sun rise." She said the land spoke to her from up here. She said it told her things no person could tell her. Clara looked out at the hollow. She tried to imagine her grandmother sitting in this exact spot decades ago, looking at this same view. It was strange to think about. Strange and beautiful and deeply sad. "What did she look like?" Clara asked. "I mean, besides the photograph, what was she really like?" Jessie was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved across the landscape like he was reading something written in the trees. "She was strong," he said, "not just in her body but in her spirit. She had a voice that could fill a whole room without raising it. She knew every plant in this forest. She knew which ones healed and which ones could kill. She knew the old songs, the ones our people sang before the white men came and tried to take our voices away. She sang them every night, even when no one was listening." He paused and looked at Clara. "She had your eyes," he said. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She looked away, toward the creek, and blinked hard. "She waited for your mother to come back," Jessie continued. "Every year she would stand at the edge of the hollow and look down the road. She never stopped believing that Ruth would come home. But Ruth never did." "Why?" Clara whispered. "Why did my mother leave?" Jessie picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. The world was different then, he said. Being Cherokee was not something people were proud of. It was something they were ashamed of. The government had taken our land, taken our children, put them in schools where they were beaten for speaking their own language. Ruth grew up in that world. She saw what it did to people. She saw the pain it caused. And when she was old enough, she made a choice. She chose to leave. She chose to become someone else. She changed her name. She moved to Ridgewater. She married a white man, and she never looked back. Clara felt anger rise in her chest, not at her mother, not exactly, but at the world that had forced her mother to make that choice, at the cruelty that had made a woman deny who she was just to survive. But Amma never blamed her, Jesse said, as if he could read Clara's thoughts. Amma understood. She knew the weight Ruth was carrying. She used to say that every generation has its own battle, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply stay alive. They sat on the ridge until the sun moved to the center of the sky. Then Jesse stood up and led Clara back down into the hollow. Along the way, he began to teach her. He stopped at certain trees and told her their names, not just their English names, but their Cherokee names, the names that described what they did, how they grew, what medicines they held inside them. He showed her a plant with small white flowers growing near the creek and told her it was used for fever. He showed her a dark green herb growing in the shadow of a fallen log and told her it could ease pain in the joints and bones. Clara listened to everything. She tried to remember every name, every detail. But there was so much, and it came so fast, and she felt overwhelmed by the size of what she did not know. I cannot remember all of this, she said, frustrated. Jesse looked at her calmly. You do not need to remember it all today, he said. The land is patient. It will teach you again and again, as many times as you need. Over the next several days, Jesse came every morning and they walked together. He taught her how to identify the tracks of deer, bear, fox, and wild turkey. He taught her how to find water by watching the way moss grew on stones. He taught her how to build a fire without matches, using a bow drill made from dry cedar and a piece of hickory. The first time she tried, she worked the drill for 20 minutes and got nothing but blisters on her palms. The second time, she worked for an hour. The third time, on the morning of her 5th day in the hollow, a tiny wisp of smoke rose from the tinder bundle, and Clara blew on it so gently, so carefully, that when the flame caught, she felt like she had created something sacred. Jesse watched her from across the fire circle. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. On the 6th day, Jesse brought something with him. It was wrapped in a piece of old cloth, and he carried it carefully, the way a person carries something precious. He sat down near the creek and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a drum. It was small, no bigger than a dinner plate, made from a wooden frame and stretched animal hide. The surface was painted with symbols Clara did not recognize. Circles, lines, a bird in flight. This was Alma's drum, Jessie said. She made it herself. She used it when she sang the old songs. She used it when she called to the spirits. She used it when she prayed. He held the drum out to Clara. She looked at it but did not take it. Her hands were trembling. I do not know how to play it, she said. You do not play a drum, Jessie said. You listen to it. The drum has its own heartbeat. You put your hand on it and you let it speak to you. Clara reached out slowly and took the drum. It was lighter than she expected. The hide was smooth and cool under her fingers. She held it against her chest and closed her eyes. And for a moment, just a brief moment, she thought she felt something. A pulse, a rhythm, like a heartbeat that was not her own. Jesse began to sing. His voice was low and steady, and the words were in Cherokee. Clara did not understand them, but she felt them. They moved through her like water, filling spaces she did not know were empty. The song was sad and beautiful, and it seemed to rise from the earth itself, from the creek and the stones and the roots of the ancient trees. When the song ended, the hollow was silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. Clara opened her eyes and found tears running down her cheeks. What does the song mean? She asked. It is a song of remembering, Jessie said. It says, we are the river that does not stop. We are the mountain that does not move. We are the fire that does not die. We remember who we are. Clara held the drum tighter. She looked at Jessie and she looked at the land around her, and she felt something breaking and building at the same time, like a wall falling down while a house was being raised in its place. That evening, Clara did something she had never done before. She sat by the fire alone, with the drum in her lap, and she tried to sing. She did not know the Cherokee words. She did not know the melodies, but she opened her mouth and let sound come out. It was rough and uncertain, more like humming than singing, but it was real. And as she sat there, with the fire warming her face and the stars pressing down from above, she felt the hollow listen to her. She felt the trees lean in. She felt the creek slow its song, as if giving her space to find her own. On the 8th day, something happened that shook Clara to her core. Jessie had taken her deeper into the forest than they had ever gone before, to a place where the trees were so old and so thick that the sunlight barely reached the ground. The air was different here, cooler, heavier, charged with something Clara could not name. They came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a circle of large stones, each one as tall as Clara's waist. Inside the circle, the ground was bare, packed hard, and in the center was a shallow pit filled with ash. "This is the ceremony ground," Jessie said. "Our people have used this place for hundreds of years. Births, deaths, healings, prayers, all of them happened here." Clara walked slowly around the circle, running her hand along the tops of the stones. They were smooth, worn down by centuries of weather and touch. She could feel something in them, a kind of energy, like heat from a fire that had gone out long ago but had left its warmth behind in the stone. "I want to do something here," Clara said suddenly. She did not know where the words came from. They just rose up inside her, unstoppable. "I want to do a ceremony. For my grandmother. For my mother. For all the years that were lost." Jessie looked at her for a long time. His face was unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "You are not ready," he said. The words hit Clara like a slap. "What do you mean I am not ready?" she said, her voice rising. "I have been here for over a week. I have walked these mountains. I have learned the plants. I have held the drum. What more do I need to do?" He stood perfectly still, like a tree that had weathered 1,000 storms, and knew that this one would pass too. "Knowledge of plants and drums is not enough," he said. "A ceremony is not something you do with your hands. It is something you do with your whole being. Your body, your mind, your spirit, all of them must be ready. And your spirit is still divided. Part of you is here, in this hollow, learning the old ways. But part of you is still back in Ridgewater, in the life you left behind. Until you decide where you truly belong, you cannot stand in this circle." Clara wanted to argue. She wanted to shout. But deep down, in the place where truth lives, whether we want it to or not, she knew he was right. She was divided. She was standing with one foot in each world, and she could not fully enter either one. She turned away from the ceremony ground and walked to the edge of the clearing. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking at the trees, fighting the tears that wanted to come. Jessie walked up beside her. He did not touch her. He did not try to comfort her. He just stood there, close enough that she could feel his presence, and waited. "I am afraid," Clara said finally. Her voice was small, like a child's. "I am afraid that if I let go of who I was, I will have nothing left." Jessie was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The caterpillar is afraid too. It goes into the darkness and everything it was dissolves. For a time it is nothing, but then something new begins to form. Something with wings." Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Jessie. His face was still calm, still steady, but there was something else in his eyes now. Something warm, something like care. "How long did it take you?" she asked. "To learn the old ways, to become who you are." Jessie almost smiled. "I am still becoming," he said. "The learning never ends. The old ways are not a destination. They are a path, and the path goes on forever." They walked back to the cabin in silence. The sun was setting, and the hollow was filled with golden light. The shadows of the trees stretched long and thin across the ground, like fingers reaching for something they could not quite touch. Clara walked beside Jessie, matching his pace, and for the first time, she did not struggle to keep up. Her legs were stronger now. Her breathing was steady. Her body was adapting to the land, even if her spirit was still finding its way. That night, Clara sat in the cabin for the first time. She had been sleeping in her truck since she arrived, but tonight she brought her sleeping bag inside and laid it on the floor near the fireplace. She built a fire in the old stone hearth, and the flames danced and popped, filling the room with warmth and light. The painting on the wall glowed in the firelight. The river, the mountains, the eagle, and Clara lay on her back and looked at it until her eyes grew heavy. Before she fell asleep, she whispered into the darkness. "Grandmother," she said, "I am here." "I am trying. I do not know if I am doing it right, but I am trying." The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the walls of the cabin, and somewhere outside an owl called out into the night, its voice rising and falling like a question that needed no answer. The next morning, Clara woke with a clarity she had not felt before. She built the fire. She boiled water for tea using the herbs Jessie had shown her. She sat on the porch of the cabin and watched the mist rise from the hollow. And she made a decision. She was going to call her boss at the diner and quit. She was going to call the library and resign. She was going to go back to Ridgewater one last time, pack up her things, close up the house, and come back to Stillwater Hollow for good. She was going to learn the old ways. She was going to restore the cabin. She was going to tend a garden. She was going to become the person she was meant to be. When Jessie arrived that morning, Clara was standing by the fire, waiting for him. There was something different about her. She stood straighter. Her eyes were clearer. Her hands were still. "I have decided," she said. Jessie looked at her. He studied her face the way he studied the land, carefully, patiently, looking for signs of what was growing beneath the surface. "Tell me," he said. "I am staying," Clara said. "This is my home. This is where I belong. I am going to go back to Ridgewater and close that chapter, and then I am coming back here and I am never leaving." Jessie was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Good," he said. And that one word, spoken in his quiet, steady voice, felt like the most powerful blessing Clara had ever received. She drove back to Ridgewater that afternoon. The drive felt different this time. The mountains did not seem like a barrier anymore. They seemed like a gateway. The narrow roads did not feel isolating. They felt protective, like arms wrapping around a place that was too precious to be easily found. When she arrived in Ridgewater, everything looked the same. The houses, the streets, the diner, the library. All of it was exactly as she had left it. But Clara was not the same. She walked through the town like a stranger visiting a place she had once known well but had long since outgrown. She packed her things quickly. She did not have much. Clothes, books, a few photographs, her mother's Bible, and a small wooden box that had sat on her mother's dresser for as long as Clara could remember. She had never opened it before. It had always been locked, and the key had been lost years ago. But now, sitting on the floor of her empty bedroom, Clara picked up the box and looked at it closely. It was made of dark wood, hand-carved, with a pattern of leaves and birds on the lid. The lock was small and old. Clara took a hairpin from her dresser drawer and worked it into the lock. It took several minutes, but finally the lock clicked and the lid opened. Inside the box were 3 things: a lock of long black hair tied with a red thread, a small stone, smooth and round, the color of the creek bed in Stillwater Hollow, and a folded piece of paper. Clara unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a letter, written in her mother's handwriting. The ink was faded but still readable. It said, "To my daughter, if she ever finds her way home, I am sorry I did not have the courage to take you there myself. I am sorry I let fear decide our story. But the land is waiting for you. Arma is waiting for you. And one day when you are ready, you will hear the call, and you will go, and you will find everything I could not give you. I love you more than the river loves the sea. Mama." Clara pressed the letter to her heart and cried. She cried for a long time, sitting on the floor of her childhood bedroom, in the house where her mother had kept her secrets and carried her guilt and loved her daughter the only way she knew how. She cried until there were no more tears, and then she stood up, put the letter in her pocket next to the photograph of Arma Birdsong, and walked out of the house for the last time. She drove back to Stillwater Hollow as the sun was setting. The mountains glowed with the last light of the day, and the road ahead of her was dark and uncertain. But Clara was not afraid anymore. She was going home. When she arrived at the hollow, Jessie was waiting by the fire. He looked at her as she stepped out of the truck, and something in his face shifted. He could see the change in her. He could see that the war inside her was over. Clara walked up to the fire and sat down across from him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her mother's letter. She handed it to Jessie. He read it slowly. his lips moving slightly with each word. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back. "Your mother loved you," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I know that now." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire and the creek and the night. Then Clara looked at Jessie and said something she had been wanting to say for days. "Teach me the ceremony," she said. "I am ready." Jessie looked at her across the flames. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he spoke. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin at dawn." Dawn came to Stillwater Hollow like a prayer. The sky shifted from black to deep purple to soft pink, and the first rays of sunlight crept through the trees like fingers searching for something precious. Clara was already awake. She had barely slept. Her body hummed with a nervous energy she could not control. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ceremony ground, the circle of stones, the ash pit, the ancient clearing where hundreds of years of Cherokee prayers had risen into the sky like smoke from a sacred fire. She dressed in simple clothes, jeans, a plain shirt, her boots. She braided her hair the way Jessie had shown her, a single braid down her back, tied with a strip of leather. She looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror she had hung on the cabin wall and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her face was thinner. Her skin was darker from days in the sun. Her eyes had changed too. They were deeper now, quieter, like they had seen something the rest of her had not yet caught up with. She stepped outside. The air was cold and damp, and the mist hung so low in the hollow that the tops of the trees disappeared into white clouds. The creek was louder than usual, swollen from rain that had fallen during the night. Everything felt alive, alert, as if the land itself knew what was about to happen. Jessie was already there. He stood at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, his eyes closed. His long black hair was loose, falling past his shoulders. He wore a simple leather vest over a white shirt, and around his neck hung a necklace of bone and turquoise beads. In his right hand he held a bundle of dried sage, and in his left he held Aimer's drum. Clara walked toward him. Her footsteps on the wet ground sounded impossibly loud. When she reached him, she stopped and waited. She had learned by now that Jessie did not like to be rushed. He had his own rhythm, and that rhythm was connected to something much older and much larger than either of them. Jessie opened his eyes. He looked at her the way he always did, steadily, deeply, like he was reading the story written inside her bones. Then he held out the sage bundle. "Light this," he said. Clara took the bundle. Her hands were trembling. She struck a match and held it to the dried leaves until they caught and began to smoke. The smoke was thick and white and smelled like the mountains after a storm. Clean, sharp, ancient. "Now cleanse yourself," Jessie said. "Move the smoke over your body. Start at your feet and move upward. Let the smoke carry away everything that does not belong. Fear, doubt, anger, sadness. Let it all go. Today you must be empty so that the ceremony can fill you." She moved the smoking sage over her feet, her legs, her body, her arms, her face. The smoke wrapped around her like a living thing, warm and soft. And as it rose, Clara felt something lifting from her, not all at once, but slowly, like layers of old paint being stripped from a wall, revealing something original and true underneath. When she finished, Jessie took the sage bundle and cleansed himself the same way. Then he turned and walked into the forest. Clara followed. The walk to the ceremony ground took nearly an hour. The path wound through thick stands of oak and hickory, past the creek, up a steep ridge, and down into a narrow valley that Clara had come to think of as the heart of the hollow. The trees here were enormous. Their trunks were wider than Clara could reach around, and their branches stretched so high that they seemed to touch the clouds. The light was soft and green, filtered through layers of leaves, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and moss. And something else, something Clara could only describe as time. When they reached the clearing, Jessie stopped at the edge of the stone circle. He turned to Clara. "Before we enter," he said, "you must understand something. A ceremony is a conversation between you and the Creator. It is not a performance. It is not something you do for anyone else. It is something you do for your own spirit, for your ancestors, and for the generations that will come after you. Everything that happens in this circle is real. Everything you feel is true. Do not fight it. Do not try to understand it. Just let it be." Clara nodded. Her mouth was dry. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure Jessie could hear it. "I need you to speak," Jessie said. "Tell me why you are here." Clara swallowed. She looked at the stones, at the ash pit, at the sky above the clearing where a single hawk was circling slowly, riding the wind in wide, lazy loops. "I am here because I was lost," she said. Her voice was shaking, but she kept going. "I spent 34 years not knowing who I was. I lived a life that did not belong to me. I walked roads that did not lead anywhere. And then I found this place. I found this land. I found my grandmother's home. And I found you. And for the first time, I feel like I am standing on solid ground. I am here because I want to honor my grandmother. I want to honor my mother. I want to honor the blood that runs in my veins. And I want to become the person I was always supposed to be." Jesse listened without moving. When she finished, he nodded once, slowly. "Good," he said. "Now we enter." He stepped over the boundary of the stone circle and Clara followed. The moment her foot touched the packed earth inside the circle, she felt something change. The air was different here, heavier, warmer. The sounds of the forest grew distant, muffled, as if a curtain had been drawn between the clearing and the rest of the world. Clara felt her skin tighten and her breath catch, and she had the overwhelming sensation that she was not alone, that the circle was full of presences she could feel but not see. Jesse knelt beside the ash pit and began to build a fire. He worked slowly and deliberately, placing each piece of wood with care, as if the arrangement mattered as much as the flame itself. Cedar at the bottom, oak on top, a nest of dry grass and bark shavings in the center. He struck a match and the fire caught immediately, as if it had been waiting to be born. The smoke rose straight up into the sky, a white column that did not bend or waver in the wind. Jesse sat back on his heels and began to sing. The song was different from any Clara had heard before. It was lower, slower, and the words seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him, from a place that was older than language itself. The melody was simple but haunting, and it seemed to vibrate in Clara's chest like a second heartbeat. Jesse handed the drum to Clara. She held it in her lap and looked at him, uncertain. "When you feel the rhythm," he said, "follow it." Clara placed her hand on the drum. At first, she felt nothing, just leather and wood. But then, slowly, she felt it. A pulse, faint and steady, like a heartbeat coming from the earth beneath her. She tapped the drum lightly, once. The sound rang out across the clearing, sharp and clean, and the echo came back from the trees like a response. She tapped again, and slowly, without thinking, she found a rhythm. It was not Jesse's rhythm. It was not Arma's rhythm. It was her own. Jesse continued to sing, and Clara drummed, and the fire burned, and the smoke rose, and the clearing filled with a sound that was bigger than both of them, a sound that seemed to come from the land itself, from the stones and the trees and the creek and the mountains, all joining together in a chorus that had been singing since the beginning of time. Clara closed her eyes. The rhythm of the drum moved through her body like electricity. She felt her hands moving on their own, her body swaying, her breath sinking with the beat, and then something happened that she would never be able to fully explain. She saw her grandmother, not in a dream, not in a memory, but right there in the circle, standing on the other side of the fire. Irma Birdsong, tall and strong, with long dark hair and deep eyes, wearing a dress of white deerskin with beadwork on the collar. She was looking at Clara with an expression that held more love than Clara had ever seen in a single human face. Clara's hand stopped on the drum. Her eyes flew open. The vision was gone. The fire crackled. Jesse's song faded into silence. The clearing was empty, except for the two of them. But Clara knew what she had seen. She knew it was real. She knew it in her blood, in her bones, in the deepest part of her spirit. "She was here," Clara whispered. Her voice was raw. "My grandmother. She was standing right there." Jesse did not look surprised. He did not question her. He simply nodded and said, "She has always been here. She never left this land. Her spirit lives in these trees, in this water, in these stones. She has been waiting for you to see her." Clara pressed her hands against her face. She was trembling, not with fear, not with cold, but with the sheer, overwhelming force of what she had just experienced. She felt like every wall she had ever built inside herself had come crashing down at once, and she was standing in the rubble, exposed and raw and completely alive. "I have never done this," she said, and her voice cracked on every word. "I have never felt anything like this. I do not know how to hold it. It is too big. Jesse moved around the fire and sat beside her. He was close enough that their shoulders almost touched. His presence was steady and warm, like the earth itself. You do not have to hold it, he said. You just have to let it move through you. The spirit world does not ask us to be strong. It asks us to be open. What you felt today, what you saw, that is the old way speaking to you. That is your grandmother telling you that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Clara lowered her hands and looked at him. His face was close. His dark eyes reflected the firelight, and in that moment she saw something in his expression that she had not seen before. Vulnerability. For all his strength, for all his knowledge, for all his years of walking the old path, Jesse Coldwater was human. He felt things. He carried things. He had his own wounds, his own losses, his own fears. "Why do you do this?" Clara asked. "Why did you wait for me? Why are you teaching me? You could have lived your life and let this land sit empty. Why did you care?" Jesse looked at the fire for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than Clara had ever heard it. "Because Amma asked me to," he said. "On the last day of her life, I sat beside her bed. She was very old, very weak. She could barely speak. But she took my hand and she said, 'Someone will come. My blood, my granddaughter. She will be lost and she will be afraid and she will not know who she is. Promise me you will wait for her. Promise me you will teach her. Promise me you will help her find her way home.'" He paused. His jaw tightened. And Clara saw something she had never expected to see. A single tear running down Jesse Coldwater's cheek. "I promised," he said. "And I have kept that promise for nearly 40 years. She could not move. She sat there beside this man who had spent 4 decades of his life waiting for her, keeping a promise made to a dying woman, watching over a piece of land and a legacy that was not his own, but that he had guarded as fiercely as if it were. She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him. His hand was rough and warm, calloused from years of working with wood and stone and earth. He did not pull away. He did not look at her. He just held her hand and let the fire burn between them and the world. They sat like that for a long time. The hawk circled above the clearing. The smoke rose. The fire crackled, and the hollow held them both in its ancient arms. When the fire burned down to coals, Jesse stood up. He reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a necklace, a string of small turquoise stones and carved wooden beads, with a single eagle feather hanging from the center. "This belonged to Amma," he said. "She made it herself. She told me to give it to the one who came home." He held it out to Clara. She stood up on shaking legs and bowed her head. Jesse placed the necklace around her neck. The turquoise stones were cool against her skin, and the eagle feather rested just above her heart. "You are Birdsong now," Jesse said. "Not Jennings. Not the woman from Ridgewater. You are Clara Birdsong, granddaughter of Amma, keeper of this land, carrier of the old ways. This is who you have always been. This is who you will always be." Clara touched the necklace with her fingertips. She looked up at Jesse. His face was close. His eyes were steady, and she saw in them something that went beyond teaching, beyond duty, beyond a promise kept. She saw love, not the romantic kind, not the fleeting kind, but the deep, ancient, unbreakable kind, the kind that grows between two people who have walked through fire together and come out the other side. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she felt. Gratitude, love, wonder, grief, joy, all tangled together like roots underground. Jesse nodded. "Do not thank me," he said. "Thank the land. Thank your grandmother. Thank the Creator who brought you here." They walked back to the cabin together. The forest was different now. The trees seemed taller. The light seemed brighter. The sounds of the birds and the creek and the wind seemed more alive, more present, as if the world had been turned up a notch and everything was vibrating at a higher frequency. Clara walked beside Jesse, and for the first time, she did not feel like a student following a teacher. She felt like an equal. She felt like a partner. When they reached the cabin, Clara stopped on the porch and turned to face the hollow. The late afternoon sun was painting everything gold. The mountains glowed. The creek shimmered. The trees stood like sentinels, ancient and wise and patient. "I am going to rebuild this cabin," Clara said. "I am going to restore the garden. I am going to learn every song, every medicine, every story. And one day, when I am ready, I am going to teach someone else the way you taught me." Jesse leaned against the porch railing and crossed his arms. There was something in his face that Clara had never seen before. Pride, not arrogance, not self-satisfaction, but the deep, quiet pride of a man who had kept a promise and watched it bear fruit. "That is the way," he said. "The old ways do not survive in books or museums. They survive in people, in the ones who carry them forward, in the ones who refuse to let them die." Clara looked at him. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Here, in the hollow, will you stay and help me?" Jesse was quiet for a long time. He looked at the trees, the mountains, the sky. He looked at the cabin, at the porch where Ama had stood 1,000 times, at the door with the carved words, "Birdsong Home." And then he looked at Clara. "I have been waiting 40 years for someone to ask me that," he said. Clara laughed. It was the first time she had laughed since she arrived in the hollow, and the sound surprised both of them. It was clear and bright and real, and it rang out across the hollow like a bell, and the trees seemed to lean toward it, and the creek seemed to sing a little louder, and somewhere in the distance the hawk cried out, its voice sharp and free. The weeks that followed were the hardest and most beautiful of Clara's life. She and Jesse worked on the cabin from dawn to dusk. They replaced the fallen section of the roof with new timber cut from deadfall trees. They patched the walls with mud and clay from the creek bed. They rebuilt the porch, board by board, nail by nail. They cleaned the fireplace and relaid the stones. They built a new bed frame from hickory wood and stuffed the mattress with dried grasses and wild cotton. They restored the garden too. Jesse knew exactly which herbs and plants Ama had grown, and he helped Clara clear the overgrown beds and replant them. Echinacea for the immune system, golden seal for infection, wild ginger for the stomach, yellow root for sore throats, black cohosh for pain. Each plant had a purpose, a story, a place in the web of Cherokee medicine that had sustained the people for thousands of years. Clara learned the songs. Jesse taught her, one at a time, line by line, note by note. The Cherokee words were difficult at first, strange on her tongue, but slowly they began to feel natural, like a language she had spoken in a past life and was now remembering. She sang in the morning when she built the fire. She sang in the evening when she tended the garden. She sang at night when she sat on the porch and watched the stars come out over the hollow, and she drummed. Every day she sat with Ama's drum and played. The rhythm came easier now, flowing through her hands without effort, connecting her to something deep and ancient that she could feel but never fully name. Sometimes when she drummed, she felt Ama's presence again. Not as a vision this time, but as a warmth, a feeling, a knowledge that she was not alone. One evening in late November, Clara and Jesse sat on the porch of the restored cabin, watching the first snow of the season fall over the hollow. The flakes were large and soft, drifting down through the bare branches of the trees like tiny white feathers. The world was quiet. The creek was still running, but its voice was softer now, muffled by the cold. Clara wore Ama's necklace. She wore it every day. The turquoise stones had grown warm against her skin, and the eagle feather moved gently with her breath. She held a cup of medicine tea in her hands and watched the snow settle on the garden, on the stones of the ceremony ground, on the roof of the cabin that was now, truly, her home. "I have been thinking about my mother," Clara said. Jesse looked at her. He waited. "I used to be angry at her," Clara continued, "for keeping the secret, for taking me away from all of this. But I understand now. She did what she had to do. She survived the only way she knew how. And in the end, she left me the letter. She left me the land. She made sure I could find my way back, even if she never could." Jesse nodded slowly. "Forgiveness is one of the hardest medicines," he said, "but it is also the most powerful." The warmth spread through her body. She looked out at the hollow, at the snow, the trees, the mountains, the creek. Everything she had been, everything she had lost, everything she had found. It was all here, in this place, in this moment. "Jesse," she said, "yes, I want to hold a ceremony. Not for myself this time. For my mother. I want to release her spirit. I want to let her know that I forgive her. I want to let her know that I found my way home." Jesse set down his cup. He looked at Clara, and his dark eyes held a light that the snow could not dim. "Then we will do it," he said, "tomorrow, at dawn." It was a quiet smile full of peace. She leaned back against the cabin wall and closed her eyes. The snow fell around her. The hollow breathed. And somewhere inside her, in the place where her grandmother's blood met her mother's love, met her own wild, stubborn, beautiful spirit, a song began to form. A new song. Her song. She would sing it tomorrow, standing in the stone circle, with the fire burning and the drum beating and the smoke rising into the cold winter sky. She would sing it for her mother, who had carried the weight of silence for an entire lifetime. She would sing it for her grandmother, who had waited decades for a granddaughter who finally came. She would sing it for Jessie, who had kept a promise through 40 years of solitude. And she would sing it for herself, for Clara Birdsong, the woman who had trembled at the edge of her own life and found the courage to step into it. The snow continued to fall. The fire inside the cabin crackled and popped. The mountains stood guard over the hollow like ancient sentinels, and the creek sang its endless song beneath the ice. And in the stillness of that winter evening, with the world wrapped in white and the sky full of stars, Clara Birdsong sat on the porch of her grandmother's cabin and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hollow knew it too. The trees knew it. The stones knew it. The creek knew it. The mountains knew it. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates the living from everything else, Alma Birdsong knew it too. She stood among the old spirits, in the place where time does not move and love does not end, and she watched her granddaughter sit in the snow and breathe in the cold air and smile at the mountains. And Alma smiled too, because the circle was complete. The river had found its way back to the sea. The fire that had burned in the birdsong blood for 1,000 years was alive again, burning bright in the chest of a woman who had once been lost and was now, finally, beautifully, irrevocably found. And Jesse Coldwater sat beside her on that porch, his shoulder touching hers, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. And he felt the weight of 40 years lift from his shoulders like smoke rising from the ceremony ground. He had kept his promise. Alma's granddaughter had come home. The old ways would continue. The songs would not die. The medicines would not be forgotten. The land would be loved again. He looked at Clara. She looked at him, and in the silence between them, in the space where words are not needed because the heart speaks louder than any language, they both understood that this was not an ending. This was a beginning. The first chapter of a story that would be told for generations. The story of a woman who trembled and said she had never done this, and a Cherokee man who stopped cold and said, "Trust me now," and the land that brought them together, and the love that held them there, and the old ways that lived on, not in museums or history books, but in the beating of a drum, the singing of a song, the planting of a seed, and the quiet, stubborn, beautiful act of coming home.